Captain Vextar Moonwhisper stood on the bridge of the luxury liner Serenity's Grace, watching his crew scramble around their stations. Warning lights flashed red across every panel. The massive ship groaned as another system failed somewhere deep in its belly. "Status report," he ordered, his voice steady despite the fear growing in his chest. Chief Engineer Talnara looked up from her console, her blue skin pale with worry. "The hyperdrive core is completely dead, Captain. The explosion damaged our main power grid. We're running on emergency power only." Moonwhisper closed his eyes for a moment. They were 3 days away from the nearest star system, drifting in the empty void between worlds. The Serenity's Grace carried 3,000 passengers, mostly wealthy Altarian nobles and their families. They had been traveling to the Crystal Worlds for the annual Harvest Festival. "How long do we have?" he asked quietly. "Life support will last maybe 4 days if we shut down everything else," Talnara replied. "The backup generators can't handle the full load for long." Around the bridge, his officers worked frantically at their stations. These were good people, trained professionals who had served on luxury liners for decades. But none of them had ever faced a crisis like this. The Altarian Republic was peaceful and safe. "Ships didn't just break down in deep space, sir," Communications Officer Relmas called out. "I'm picking up some chatter on the emergency frequencies. There's a human patrol in this sector." Several officers turned to look at Moonwhisper. The captain felt his stomach twist. Humans. The crude newcomers who had stumbled into space travel only a few hundred years ago. Most Altarians considered them barely civilized barbarians. Their ships were ugly and functional, their crews loud and undisciplined. "How far away?" Moonwhisper asked. "Unknown, sir. The signal is weak. Could be anywhere in a 3-day radius." Moonwhisper walked to the large viewing window at the front of the bridge. Outside, space stretched endlessly in all directions. No stars, no planets, just the cold emptiness between systems. His passengers trusted him to keep them safe. 3,000 souls, including children and elderly nobles who had never faced hardship in their long lives. "Captain," his first officer, Commander Yilvar, approached quietly. "Perhaps we should consider our options carefully." The passengers. They would prefer to maintain their dignity. Moonwhisper understood what his first officer meant. Many of the passengers would rather die than be rescued by humans. The Altarian way was to face death with grace and honor. Being saved by primitive humans would be seen as deeply shameful. "Send the distress call," Moonwhisper said firmly. "Sir?" Yilvar looked surprised. "You heard me. Send it on all frequencies. Include our passenger manifest and the nature of our emergency." Relmas hesitated at his station. "Captain, are you certain? The passengers won't appreciate—" "The passengers are not the captain of this ship." Moonwhisper cut him off. "I am. Send the call." The communications officer's hands moved over his controls. Within moments, the distress signal began broadcasting into the void. It would travel at light speed in all directions, carrying their desperate plea for help to anyone who might be listening. Meanwhile, far across the emptiness of space, the human heavy cruiser HMS Defiant moved through the darkness on routine patrol. The ship was not beautiful by Altarian standards. Its hull was gray and angular, covered with weapon mounts and sensor arrays. But it was built to last, designed by humans who understood that space was dangerous and unforgiving. On the bridge, Communications Officer Sarah Chen sat at her station, monitoring the various radio frequencies. She wore the blue uniform of the Earth Defense Force, her black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Around her, the night shift crew went about their duties with quiet efficiency. The human bridge was very different from its Altarian counterpart. Where Altarian ships emphasized beauty and comfort, human vessels focused on function. Every surface served a purpose. Every control was placed where it could be reached quickly in an emergency. "Captain Torres to the bridge," Sarah called into her headset as she studied the signal that had just appeared on her screen. Captain Marcus Torres arrived within minutes, still wearing his exercise clothes. He was a man in his 40s with graying hair and the weathered look of someone who had spent his life in space. He had been in his quarters working out on the small exercise bike that helped maintain muscle tone in zero gravity. "What do you have, Chen?" he asked, moving to look over her shoulder. "Distress call, sir. Altarian luxury liner, 3,000 passengers. Their hyperdrive failed and they're on emergency power only." Torres studied the coordinates displayed on her screen. "How far?" 3 days at maximum burn, sir. They'll be cutting it close on life support." The captain was quiet for a moment, thinking. The Defiant was currently on patrol in a remote sector, checking shipping lanes for pirate activity. Their orders were to complete the patrol route and return to base. Responding to the distress call would take them far off course. "Signal the engine room," Torres said finally. "Tell Rodriguez I need everything she can give me. Set course for those coordinates and push the engines to redline if necessary." Sarah nodded and began sending the orders. Around the bridge, the night shift crew responded immediately. This was what they trained for. When someone needed help in space, you didn't ask questions about politics or species. You went and helped. Chief Engineer Lisa Rodriguez received the call in the engine room, where she had been performing routine maintenance on the fusion reactors. She was a small woman with oil-stained hands and an intimate knowledge of every system on the ship. "You want me to push the engines how hard?" she asked into her communicator. "Whatever it takes, Chief," Torres replied. 3,000 people are going to die if we don't get there in time." Rodriguez looked at the engine status displays. The fusion drives were already running at 90% capacity. Pushing them harder would be dangerous. Components could fail. They could end up stranded themselves. "Give me 10 minutes to prep the systems," she said. "I'll get you your speed, Captain." Back on the Serenity's Grace, the situation continued to worsen. The temperature on the passenger decks had dropped several degrees as the environmental system struggled to keep up. In the luxury suites, Altarian nobles wrapped themselves in expensive robes and complained about the inconvenience. Lord Cavith, one of the wealthiest passengers, demanded to speak with Captain Moonwhisper. He was a tall, elegant Altarian with silver hair and robes that cost more than most people earned in a year. "Captain, I understand you sent a distress call to the humans," Lord Cavith said when he reached the bridge. "That's correct, my lord. I trust you understand that many of us would prefer to handle this situation with dignity. The Altarian way has always been to face adversity with grace." Moonwhisper turned to face the noble. "My lord, with respect, the Altarian way has always been to preserve life. I will not let 3,000 people die for the sake of pride." Lord Cavith's expression hardened. "You may have doomed us to something worse than death, Captain. Being rescued by primitives will shame our families for generations." Before Moonwhisper could respond, Relmas called out from his station, "Captain, I'm receiving a response to our distress call. It's from a human warship." The bridge fell silent. Even Lord Cavith stopped talking. "What do they say?" Moonwhisper asked. Relmas listened to his earpiece for a moment. "They say they're coming, sir. Full speed. Estimated arrival in 72 hours. Moonwhisper felt relief wash over him. They might actually survive this. He looked at Lord Cavith, who had turned pale at the news. 72 hours, the captain said quietly. "We can last 72 hours. In the depths of space, the HMS Defiant changed course and began accelerating toward the coordinates of the distressed Altarian vessel. Behind them, their engine trail glowed bright blue as the fusion drives pushed beyond their normal limits. The rescue was beginning. Admiral Cathara sat in her command center on the Altarian naval base, studying the reports that had just arrived from the Deep Space Monitoring Station. The news about the Serenity's Grace was troubling, but what bothered her more was the human response. She was an older Altarian, with the silver markings of high rank tattooed along her temples. For 40 years she had served in the Altarian Republic Navy, working her way up through the ranks to become one of their most respected commanders. She had always prided herself on making logical, measured decisions. "Status of our rescue vessels?" she asked her aide, Commander Rixall. "The closest ships are 2 weeks away, Admiral. The Moonbeam and the Starlight are currently in the outer systems. Even at maximum speed, they cannot reach the Serenity's Grace in time." Kithara nodded grimly. She had already calculated the numbers herself. The passengers would be dead long before Altarian help could arrive. But there was another option, one that made her uncomfortable. And the human vessel? The HMS Defiant. It's a military ship, Admiral. A heavy cruiser from their defense force. They're already en route to the coordinates. The Admiral stood and walked to the large window that looked out over the naval base. Hundreds of Altarian ships moved in graceful patterns through the space around the station. Their hulls gleamed like polished crystal, beautiful and elegant. Nothing like the crude human vessels with their angular designs and weapon-covered hulls. "Send a message to this Captain Torres," she ordered. "Thank him for his concern, but inform him that Altarian rescue vessels are already responding. His assistance will not be necessary." Commander Rixall hesitated. "Admiral, our ships cannot possibly reach them in time. The humans are their only hope." I am aware of the situation, Commander, Cathara replied coldly, but we cannot set a precedent of depending on human charity. The Altarian Republic has managed its own affairs for thousands of years. We will not start accepting help from primitives now. The message was sent within the hour. It traveled through space at light speed, a polite but firm diplomatic communication telling the human captain to turn around and leave Altarian citizens to their fate. Aboard the HMS Defiant, Captain Torres read the message with growing anger. He stood in his ready room, a small office just off the main bridge. The walls were lined with books, real paper books that he had collected during his years in space. He found them comforting in a way that digital files could never be. "They want us to what?" asked Commander Sarah Walsh, his first officer. She was a tall woman with red hair and the kind of steady presence that made her perfect for the job. "They want us to stand down and let their own ships handle the rescue," Torres replied, setting down the message pad. "But their ships are 2 weeks away. Those people will be dead by then." Torres walked to the small window in his ready room. Outside, the stars were blue-shifted because of their high speed. The Defiant was pushing through space at velocities that would have been impossible just a few generations ago. Human engineering had come a long way in a short time. "Get me a secure channel to Earth Command," he ordered. The call took several minutes to connect because of the distance involved. When Admiral Jackson's face appeared on the screen, he looked tired. It was late at night in Earth's time zone, but the Admiral had been woken up for this conversation. "Captain Torres, I understand you're responding to an Altarian distress call." "That's correct, sir. 3,000 civilians in immediate danger. But the Altarian Navy wants us to back off and let them handle it." Admiral Jackson rubbed his forehead. "The Altarians are our allies, Marcus. We have to respect their wishes." "Sir, with all due respect, those people are going to die if we turn around now. The Altarian rescue ships can't possibly reach them in time." "I understand your position, Captain, but this is a diplomatic issue now. We can't risk damaging our relationship with the Altarian Republic over this." Torres felt his anger building. He had spent his entire career in space, and he had learned one simple rule that every spacer understood. When someone sent a distress call, you responded. It didn't matter what species they were or what political complications might arise. You helped people in trouble. "Admiral, I'm going to continue on course." "Captain, that's a direct order to stand down." "Sir, I'm having trouble with my communications array. I think we're losing the signal." Admiral Jackson's expression hardened. "Marcus, don't do this. Your career—" "I'm sorry, sir, you're breaking up. I'll report back when we've completed the rescue." Torres cut the connection and turned to Commander Walsh, who had been listening to the entire conversation. "Well, that's probably the end of my career," he said with a slight smile. "Mine too, sir," Walsh replied. "I'll inform the crew about our communications problems." As the message spread through the ship, something remarkable happened. Not a single member of the crew questioned the decision to ignore orders. From the engine room to the medical bay, every human aboard the Defiant understood what they were doing and why they were doing it. In the engine room, Chief Engineer Rodriguez pushed the fusion drives even harder. The engines were running at 110% of their normal capacity, well into the red zone on all the safety displays. The hull vibrated with the strain, and warning alarms had been beeping for hours. "How long can we maintain this speed?" asked Lieutenant Peterson, one of the junior engineers. "As long as we need to," Rodriguez replied, checking her instruments. "These engines are built tough. They can handle the strain." Peterson looked at the red warning lights covering his console. "What if something breaks?" Rodriguez turned to look at the young officer. He was fresh out of the academy, probably on his first deep space assignment. "Then we fix it," she said simply. "That's what engineers do." Meanwhile, in the medical bay, Dr. Amanda Foster was preparing for what could be a massive rescue operation. She had never treated Altarians before, but she had studied their physiology during her training. Their basic biology was similar enough to humans that most medical procedures would work. "How many patients are we looking at?" asked Nurse Martinez as she helped prepare additional beds. 3,000 potentially, Dr. Foster replied. "Most will probably be suffering from hypothermia and oxygen deprivation. We'll need to set up triage areas on multiple decks. Are we equipped for that many patients?" Dr. Foster looked around the medical bay, which was designed to handle maybe 50 patients at most. "We'll make it work. We always do." Back on the bridge, Captain Torres watched the navigation display as they raced toward the coordinates of the distressed Altarian vessel. His communications officer had been fielding increasingly urgent messages from both Earth Command and the Altarian Navy, all demanding that the Defiant turn around. "Sir," Communications Officer Chen called out, "I'm receiving another message from Admiral Kithara. She's threatening to file formal diplomatic protests if we don't withdraw immediately." "Any word from the Serenity's Grace?" Torres asked. "They're still broadcasting their distress signal, sir. Life support is holding, but just barely." Torres nodded. That was all that mattered. 3,000 people were dying, and the Defiant was their only hope. Politics and diplomacy could wait until after the rescue was complete. On the Serenity's Grace, the situation continued to deteriorate. The passenger decks were now so cold that people could see their breath. The elderly passengers were suffering the most, huddled together in the common areas where the emergency heaters were working. Captain Moonwhisper made regular announcements, trying to keep morale up while being honest about their situation. The human ship was still more than a day away, and their life support systems were failing faster than expected. "Captain," Commander Yilvar approached him quietly. "Lord Cavith is organizing a petition among the passengers. They want you to tell the humans not to come." Moonwhisper felt exhaustion weighing down on him. He had been on the bridge for 36 hours straight, managing the crisis and trying to keep his ship together. "How many have signed this petition?" "About half the passengers, sir. They believe it would be better to die with honor than live with the shame of being rescued by humans." The captain looked around his bridge. His crew was working desperately to keep the ship functional, using every trick they knew to extend their life support. These were good people, professionals who deserved a chance to live. "Commander, please inform Lord Cavith that I am the captain of this vessel. I make the decisions about rescue operations, not the passengers. Sir, they're threatening to file complaints with the Altarian Senate when we get back." "If we get back," Moonwhisper corrected, "and I'm more concerned about making sure we do get back than I am about complaints to the Senate." As the hours passed, both ships raced toward their meeting point in the emptiness of space. The Defiant pushed its engines beyond all safe limits while the Serenity's Grace struggled to maintain life support for its 3,000 passengers. In the depths of space, two very different philosophies were about to collide: the Altarian way of pride and dignity versus the human way of stubborn determination to help anyone in need, regardless of the consequences. The HMS Defiant dropped out of hyperspace exactly 71 hours and 43 minutes after receiving the distress call. Captain Torres stood on the bridge watching as the main viewer showed the results of their desperate race across space. What they found was worse than anyone had expected. "My God," whispered Commander Walsh, staring at the display. The Serenity's Grace hung in space like a dying whale, its elegant hull dark except for a few flickering emergency lights. But that wasn't the worst part. Behind the luxury liner, filling half the screen, was the bulk of a rogue planet. The massive world drifted through space without a star, a frozen ball of rock and ice that had been ejected from its original solar system millions of years ago. "Distance to the planet?" Torres asked his navigation officer. "The Altarian ship is caught in the gravity well, sir. They're being pulled down slowly but steadily. At current rate of descent, they'll impact the surface in approximately 7 hours and 20 minutes. Torres felt his stomach clench. This had just gone from a difficult rescue to an impossible one. Not only did they need to save 3,000 people from a ship with failing life support, they had to do it while fighting the gravity of an entire planet. Communications. "Hail the Serenity's Grace," the response came immediately. Captain Moonwhisper's face appeared on the screen, and Torres was shocked by what he saw. The Altarian looked exhausted, his elegant features drawn with stress and fatigue. Behind him, the bridge was dimly lit by emergency lighting. "Captain Torres," Moonwhisper said, his voice hoarse. "Thank you for coming, though I fear you may have risked your ship for nothing." "What's your status, Captain?" "Life support is failing across all decks. We've lost main power completely. The gravity well caught us 6 hours ago, and we don't have enough thruster power to break free." Torres studied the tactical display. The Serenity's Grace was massive, designed for luxury rather than efficiency. It would take enormous force to pull it away from the planet's gravity. "How many people can you evacuate?" "Our escape pods were damaged in the hyperdrive explosion. We have maybe enough pods for 300 people. 300 out of 3,000. Torres looked around his bridge. His crew was watching him, waiting for orders. They had pushed their ship to its limits to get here, and now they faced an impossible situation. "We're going to get everyone off that ship," Torres announced. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, the ship's tactical officer, stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, that's impossible. We don't have the cargo capacity for 3,000 people, and our shuttles can't make enough trips before the ship impacts." Torres turned to his chief engineer, who had come up from the engine room when they dropped out of hyperspace. "Rodriguez, can we use our tractor beams to stop their descent?" Chief Engineer Rodriguez pulled up schematics on her tablet, studying the numbers. "The Serenity's Grace has about 10 times our mass, Captain. Our tractor beams aren't designed for something that big. But can we do it?" Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, running calculations in her head. "If we link all our tractor beam generators together and divert power from everything else, maybe. But we'd have to get really close to the Altarian ship. One mistake and we both crash into the planet. What about life support?" Dr. Foster had arrived on the bridge. "If we're taking on 3,000 refugees, where are we going to put them all?" Torres looked at his senior officers. Each of them was presenting him with perfectly logical reasons why the rescue was impossible, but he had spent his career learning that impossible was just another word for difficult. "Here's what we're going to do," he said finally. "Rodriguez, I want you to prepare to link all our tractor beam systems. We're going to stop their descent first, then worry about the evacuation." "Sir, if we divert that much power to the tractor beams, we'll lose life support on most of our own decks," Chief Engineer Rodriguez warned. "Then we'll all have to crowd together until this is over. Morrison, I want you to prepare EVA teams. We're going to have to manually install portable life support systems on their ship." Morrison nodded, already mentally organizing the dangerous spacewalk operations they would need to perform. "Foster, set up triage areas throughout the ship. Use the cargo bays, the recreation areas, anywhere we can fit people. And prepare for hypothermia cases." As his crew rushed to carry out their orders, Torres turned back to the main screen where Captain Moonwhisper was still waiting. "Captain, we're going to attempt to stop your descent and restore your life support. I need you to shut down all unnecessary systems and prepare your people for what might be a rough ride." Moonwhisper's expression showed surprise and something that might have been hope. "Captain Torres, the risks you're taking, why would you do this for us?" Torres thought about the question for a moment. "Because that's what people do, Captain. When someone needs help, you help them." The next few hours tested every system on both ships. Chief Engineer Rodriguez worked miracles in the Defiance engine room, rerouting power systems in ways that would have horrified the designers. She managed to channel 90% of their total power output into the tractor beam array. On the bridge, Torres watched the tactical display as they maneuvered closer to the Serenity's Grace. The luxury liner was enormous, its crystal white hull reflecting the light from the Defiance floodlights. Below them both, the rogue planet loomed like a dark threat. "Tractor beams locked on," reported the tactical officer. "Beginning power transfer." The Defiant shuddered as enormous forces played across its hull. The tractor beams created invisible cables of pure energy, trying to arrest the descent of a ship 10 times their mass. Warning alarms began sounding as systems overloaded throughout the ship. "Hull stress approaching critical limits," called out the engineering officer. "Hold course," Torres ordered. "Rodriguez, can the beams take it?" The chief engineer's voice came over the intercom from the engine room. "The beam generators are running at 150% capacity, Captain. I can't guarantee how long they'll last." On the main viewer, they could see the descent rate of the Serenity's Grace beginning to slow. But it wasn't enough. The planet's gravity was simply too strong. "Morrison, are your EVA teams ready?" Torres asked. "Standing by, sir." "Launch them. Get those portable life support units installed on the Altarian ship. If we can't save the ship, we'll save the people." What followed was one of the most dangerous spacewalk operations in human history. Lieutenant Commander Morrison led 3 teams of EVA specialists in a series of trips between the ships. They carried portable life support generators, emergency heating units, and medical supplies across the void. The work was incredibly hazardous. The 2 ships were connected by tractor beams but still moving relative to each other. One slip, one miscalculation, could send a human tumbling into space or crashing into the hull of either vessel. But the humans pressed on with characteristic stubbornness. When their standard EVA suits proved too bulky for some of the work, they improvised with lighter gear. When the portable generators were too heavy to carry safely, They rigged them to magnetic sleds and dragged them across the hull. Aboard the Serenity's Grace, the Altarian passengers watched in amazement. Through the viewing ports, they could see human figures in spacesuits working with impossible determination. These crude barbarians were risking their lives again and again to save people they had never met. Lord Cavith, who had been so opposed to human rescue, found himself pressed against a viewing port watching the EVA operations. A human engineer was working just meters away, installing a life support unit while hanging from a safety line in the vacuum of space. Incredible, he whispered to himself. The human engineer looked up from his work and saw the Altarian watching through the window. Even through the helmet faceplate, Lord Cavith could see the human smile and give him a thumbs up before returning to work. After 6 hours of desperate effort, the situation finally began to turn around. The portable life support units were restoring heat and oxygen to the passenger areas. The Defiant's tractor beams had slowed the descent to almost nothing, though both ships were still caught in the planet's gravity well. "We've bought ourselves time," Torres announced to both crews over the communications link, "but we're not out of this yet. We need to break free of the gravity well completely." Chief Engineer Rodriguez had one more miracle up her sleeve. "Captain, what if we use our main engines and the tractor beams together? Instead of trying to pull the Altarian ship up, we could push ourselves down and use our momentum to slingshot both ships away from the planet." The maneuver was incredibly risky. They would have to dive deeper into the gravity well before attempting to break free. One miscalculation would send both ships crashing into the planet's surface. "Do it," Torres ordered. The next 30 minutes tested the limits of both human engineering and human courage. The Defiant dove toward the rogue planet, using its engines to accelerate into the gravity well while maintaining its tractor beam lock on the Serenity's Grace. The hull creaked and groaned under forces it was never designed to handle. At the critical moment, Torres gave the order to reverse engines and attempt the slingshot maneuver. Both ships whipped around the planet in a complex gravitational dance, using the planet's own gravity to fling them back into deep space. With both ships safely away from the rogue planet, the real work began. The Serenity's Grace had power and basic life support, but many of its systems were still damaged. The Defiant's crew immediately began organizing repair teams to help restore the luxury liner to full functionality. Dr. Amanda Foster was the first to cross between ships, leading a medical team to treat the Altarian passengers who had suffered during the crisis. She floated through the airlock connecting the two vessels, carrying medical supplies and portable diagnostic equipment. The first thing that struck her about the Altarian ship was its beauty. Even damaged and running on emergency power, the Serenity's Grace was stunning. The corridors were wide and elegant, decorated with flowing patterns that seemed to change color in the light. Everything was designed for comfort and aesthetics, rather than pure function. But what really caught her attention were the passengers themselves. Dr. Foster had studied Altarian physiology, but had never actually treated one of their people. They were tall and graceful, with skin that ranged from pale blue to deep purple. Their features were delicate and refined, almost ethereal in their beauty. Many of them were clearly suffering from hypothermia and oxygen deprivation. The elderly passengers were in the worst condition, huddled together in the main passenger lounge where the emergency heating had been most effective. "Ma'am?" One of the Altarian passengers approached her hesitantly. It was a young woman with silver hair and the fine robes of nobility. "Are you the human medical officer?" "I'm Dr. Foster, yes. Are you injured?" The young Altarian looked surprised by the directness of the question. "No, ma'am. I wanted to thank you for coming to help us. My grandmother is very sick. She's been unconscious for several hours." Dr. Foster followed the young woman to where an elderly Altarian lay on a makeshift bed. The old woman's breathing was shallow and her skin had taken on a grayish tint. Without hesitation, Dr. Foster knelt beside her and began a medical examination. "What's her name?" she asked while checking vital signs. "Lady Silvara. She's 93 years old. She was very cold for many hours." Dr. Foster nodded, pulling out a portable heater and medical scanner. As she worked, other Altarian passengers gathered around to watch. They seemed fascinated by her efficient, no-nonsense approach to medicine. "Is she going to be okay?" the young woman asked. "She's hypothermic and dehydrated, but nothing that can't be treated," Dr. Foster replied, setting up an IV line. She'll need to stay warm and get plenty of fluids, but she should recover completely. What amazed the Altarian passengers was how naturally Dr. Foster adapted her treatment methods for their physiology. She didn't have specialized Altarian medical equipment, but she made do with what she had, adjusting dosages and procedures based on her knowledge of their biology. "Doctor," another passenger approached, "my child has been having trouble breathing." Dr. Foster looked up from Lady Silvara to see a small Altarian child, maybe 8 years old, in the arms of his worried mother. Without being asked, she immediately began examining the child. More and more passengers came forward with medical problems. Dr. Foster and her team worked tirelessly, moving through the passenger areas and treating everyone who needed help. What struck the Altarians was that the humans never asked about payment or social status. They treated noble lords and ship's crew members with exactly the same care and attention. Meanwhile, the engineering teams were performing their own kind of magic. Chief Engineer Rodriguez had sent her best technicians to work on the Serenity's Grace's damaged systems. The two engineering teams worked side by side, human and Altarian, sharing knowledge and techniques. "Your fusion reactor design is fascinating," Rodriguez told Chief Engineer Talnara as they worked on restoring the main power grid. "Much more elegant than our systems." Talnara looked surprised. "But surely human technology is more advanced." "You're the ones who rescued us," Rodriguez laughed. "Advanced doesn't always mean better. Your people have had thousands of years to refine your designs. Our stuff works, but it's not nearly as beautiful as yours." The Altarian engineer found herself warming to the blunt honesty of the human woman. "Your tractor beam system saved our lives. Our ships don't have anything nearly as powerful." "Different philosophies," Rodriguez explained as she worked on a damaged power coupling. "You build for beauty and efficiency. We build for reliability and brute force. Both approaches have their place." As the repair work continued, the Altarian passengers began to observe something that challenged everything they thought they knew about humans. The crew of the Defiant was incredibly diverse, representing many different Earth cultures and colonies, yet they worked together with seamless coordination. Lieutenant Morrison, who was coordinating the EVA operations, was clearly of African descent. Dr. Foster appeared to be of mixed Asian and European heritage. Chief Rodriguez was obviously from one of the Latin American colonies. The crew included people who looked like they came from every continent on Earth, yet there was no hierarchy based on background or appearance. Orders were followed based on competence and rank, not on social class or genetic heritage. Lord Cavith, watching the repair operations from an observation deck, found this absolutely fascinating. On Altair, society was strictly organized by birth and breeding. Noble families had ruled for thousands of years, maintaining their positions through careful genetic selection and social traditions. The idea that a ship could be run by people from dozens of different backgrounds was almost incomprehensible. "Lord Cavith," a voice said behind him. He turned to see Captain Torres approaching. "Captain Torres, I wanted to thank you personally for what you've done." Torres shrugged, the gesture somehow managing to be both casual and respectful. "Just doing our job, sir. I must ask you something that has been puzzling me. Your crew? They come from many different worlds, different backgrounds. How do you maintain discipline and coordination?" Torres looked out at the work crews moving between the ships. "With respect, sir, I think you're asking the wrong question. It's not about maintaining discipline. It's about shared purpose I don't understand. Every person on my crew volunteered to be here. They chose to serve in space to help protect trade routes and respond to emergencies. When you share that kind of purpose, background becomes less important than competence." Lord Cavith considered this. "But surely there must be conflicts. Different cultures, different values. Wise, of course there are differences," Torres agreed. "But space has a way of putting things in perspective. When you're floating in the void between stars, you realize that the things that divide people on planets don't matter much out here. What matters is whether you can count on the person next to you." As they talked, a young human engineer floated past the observation window, carrying repair equipment toward the Altarian ship. She waved cheerfully at Captain Torres, who waved back. "Petty Officer Kim," Torres explained. "Born on Mars, parents were originally from Korea and Nigeria. Brilliant engineer, terrible cook, plays the violin like an angel. Out here, that's what defines her, not where her grandparents came from." Lord Cavith watched the young woman disappear into the airlock. "This is very different from our way." "Not better or worse," Torres said diplomatically. "Just different. Your people have created a beautiful, stable civilization. Ours tends to be more chaotic, but effective, apparently. Torres smiled. We have our moments. The conversation was interrupted by an announcement over the ship's communication system. It was Captain Moonwhisper's voice addressing both crews. Attention all personnel. I have received word that Admiral Cathara and the Altarian rescue fleet will arrive in 18 hours. Thanks to the heroic efforts of the crew of the HMS Defiant, all passengers and crew of the Serenity's Grace are safe, and our ship is fully operational. There was a pause. Then Moonwhisper continued. I also want to announce that Captain Torres has agreed to accept a formal dinner invitation tonight. The passengers of the Serenity's Grace would like to express their gratitude properly. Torres looked surprised. I don't remember agreeing to any dinner. Lord Cavith smiled, the first genuine smile he had shown since the crisis began. Captain, in Altarian culture, when someone saves your life, you don't give them a choice about accepting thanks. That evening, the main dining hall of the Serenity's Grace was transformed into something magnificent. The Altarian passengers had worked together to prepare a feast using the ship's emergency food supplies and what little the humans could contribute from their own stores. The dining hall itself was breathtaking, with crystal walls that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Long tables were arranged in elegant curves, set with fine china and crystal that had somehow survived the crisis intact. Captain Torres attended with his senior officers, all of them looking uncomfortable in their dress uniforms. They were used to the functional spaces of their warship, not the refined luxury of Altarian society. But as the evening progressed, something remarkable happened. The formal barriers between the two groups began to break down. Dr. Foster found herself in deep conversation with Altarian physicians about the differences in their medical practices. Chief Rodriguez was explaining human engineering principles to fascinated Altarian technicians. The morning brought a sight that few in this sector of space had ever seen before. The Altarian rescue fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their crystal hulls gleaming like jewels against the starfield. At their head was Admiral Cathara's flagship, the Luminous Dawn, a vessel of such beauty that it seemed more like a work of art than a warship. Admiral Cathara stood on her bridge, expecting to find the scene of a tragedy. Her ships had been too late to save the passengers of the Serenity's Grace, and she expected to arrive at the aftermath of a failed human rescue attempt. Instead, what she saw on her main viewer left her speechless. The Serenity's Grace hung in space, fully powered and apparently operational. Beside it, the human heavy cruiser HMS Defiant maintained a respectful distance. Both ships showed signs of recent damage, but both were clearly intact and functional. Status report, Admiral Cathara ordered her communications officer. All passengers and crew of the Serenity's Grace are safe and accounted for, Admiral. Their ship is fully operational. The human vessel appears to have suffered minor damage but is also functional. Admiral Cathara studied the tactical display in disbelief. How is this possible? Our own analysis showed that the mission was impossible. Unknown, Admiral. Should I request a full report from Captain Moonwhisper? Before the Admiral could respond, her communications officer spoke again. Admiral, I'm receiving a priority message from Captain Moonwhisper. He's requesting permission to give tours of his ship to members of the human crew. Tours. Admiral Cathara couldn't hide her surprise. What kind of tours? Apparently, several Altarian passengers have requested to visit the human warship as well, Admiral. Captain Moonwhisper is asking for guidance on diplomatic protocol. This was completely outside Admiral Cathara's experience. In her 40 years of service, she had never heard of Altarian civilians wanting to tour a human military vessel. The very idea seemed absurd. Signal Captain Moonwhisper that I will be coming aboard immediately, she ordered. An hour later, Admiral Cathara stepped through the airlock onto the Serenity's Grace, accompanied by her senior staff. What she found there challenged everything she thought she knew about human-Altarian relations. The passenger areas were filled with mixed groups of humans and Altarians, engaged in animated conversations. She watched in amazement as a human engineer explained something to a group of fascinated Altarian children. Using a tablet to show them diagrams of a fusion reactor, Admiral Cathara, Captain Moonwhisper approached with obvious relief. Thank you for coming so quickly. Captain, I need a full report on what happened here. Our analyst said rescue was impossible. Moonwhisper gestured toward the viewing port where the HMS Defiant was visible. The humans disagreed with that analysis, Admiral. They pulled us out of a gravity, while using their tractor beams, and then spent hours manually installing life support equipment, while in EVA suits. That should have been impossible. The humans don't seem to believe in impossible, Admiral, only difficult. Admiral Cathara looked around at the mixed groups of passengers and crew. And this fraternization? This is highly unusual. Admiral, these people saved our lives. They risked their own ship and crew to rescue complete strangers. When someone does that for you, traditional diplomatic protocols seem less important. Before Admiral Cathara could respond, she was approached by a familiar figure. Lord Cavith, one of the most conservative nobles in the Altarian Republic, walked up with what appeared to be a human officer. Admiral, Lord Cavith said formally, I'd like you to meet Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison of the HMS Defiant. He personally led the EVA teams that saved our lives. Morrison stepped forward and offered what Admiral Cathara recognized as a human military salute. Admiral, it's an honor to meet you. Admiral Cathara found herself automatically returning the salute, then wondered why she had done so. Commander Morrison, I understand you performed some remarkable EVA operations. Just doing our job, ma'am. Lord Cavith here was telling me about Altarian space architecture. Fascinating stuff. Admiral Cathara looked at Lord Cavith in surprise. The elderly noble was one of the most vocal opponents of human contact in the Senate. Lord Cavith, you were discussing our technology with humans? Admiral, after watching them work for 18 hours straight to save our lives, it seemed churlish not to answer their questions. Besides, they have some very interesting ideas about engineering that we might learn from. This was becoming more surreal by the moment. Admiral Cathara excused herself and made her way to the bridge, where she hoped to find Captain Moonwhisper and get some answers about what had really happened. On the bridge, she found Captain Moonwhisper in deep conversation with Captain Torres. The two men were studying star charts together, apparently planning the safest route to the nearest starport. Captain Torres, Admiral Cathara said formally, I am Admiral Cathara of the Altarian Republic Navy. Torres turned and offered a respectful nod. Admiral, it's good to finally meet you. I understand your ships made excellent time getting here. Captain, I must ask you directly, why did you ignore our request to withdraw and let us handle this rescue? Torres was quiet for a moment, considering his answer carefully. Admiral, with all due respect, your ships couldn't have reached here in time. 3,000 people would have died. But you risked a serious diplomatic incident. Yes, ma'am, I did, and I'd do it again under the same circumstances. Admiral Cathara studied the human captain. He was younger than she had expected, with the weathered look of someone who had spent his life in deep space. His uniform was practical rather than decorative, and he carried himself with quiet confidence rather than arrogance. Captain Torres, I need to understand something. Your crew risked their lives repeatedly to save Altarian civilians, people you had never met from a species that has often been less than welcoming to humans. Why? Torres looked genuinely puzzled by the question. Because they needed help, Admiral. When someone sends a distress call, you respond. That's how it works in space. Even when responding might damage your career? Even when your own government ordered you to stand down? Admiral, I've been in space for 20 years. I've seen what happens when people are left to die because of politics or pride. I won't be part of that regardless of the consequences. Admiral Cathara found herself impressed despite her reservations. This human was either completely naive about political realities or operating from a moral framework that she had never encountered before. What about your crew? Did they support your decision to ignore orders? Torres smiled slightly. Admiral, you'll have to ask them that yourself. But I think you'll find that most spacers, human or Altarian, understand that some things are more important than following orders. Later that day, Admiral Cathara did indeed speak with members of the human crew. What she found was a group of professionals who spoke about the rescue operation as if it had been the most natural thing in the world. Of course, we ignored the order to stand down, Chief Engineer Rodriguez told her bluntly. 3,000 people were going to die. What kind of person follows orders in a situation like that? Dr. Foster was equally direct. Admiral, I took an oath to preserve life. That oath doesn't have a species clause in it. But it was a conversation with one of the younger officers that really opened Admiral Cathara's eyes to how different human thinking was from Altarian assumptions. Petty Officer Kim, the young engineer Lord Cavith had mentioned, was working on final repairs to the Serenity's Grace's navigation system when Admiral Cathara found her. "Petty officer, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Admiral." Kim looked up from her work, showing no sign of intimidation at talking to such a high-ranking officer. "Your people have a reputation for being aggressive, warlike, yet what I've seen here suggests something very different." Kim considered the question seriously. "I think maybe people confuse being willing to fight with looking for a fight, Admiral. We'll fight when we have to, but mostly we just want to help people and explore the galaxy. But your ships are heavily armed. Your culture seems focused on conflict." "Our ships are armed because space is dangerous," Kim replied simply. "Pirates, hostile aliens, natural disasters. But the weapons aren't the point. The point is being able to help when someone needs it." She gestured toward the Altarian ship around them. "Look at this place. It's beautiful, elegant, peaceful. But when the crisis came, all that beauty couldn't save them. Sometimes you need ugly, functional tools to preserve beautiful things." Admiral Cathara found herself thinking about that conversation for hours afterward. She had always assumed that humans were crude and militaristic because their ships were built for war, but perhaps she'd been looking at it backward. Perhaps they built their ships for war so they could preserve peace. The time came for the human ship to depart. The formal farewell ceremony was held in the main hangar bay of the Serenity's Grace, with both crews present along with Admiral Cathara and her senior staff. Captain Moonwhisper spoke first, presenting Captain Torres with the Star of Altair, the highest civilian honor their republic could bestow. "Captain Torres, by the authority of the Altarian Senate and in recognition of your extraordinary courage and selflessness, I present you with this award."